Hi everyone and welcome to your daily oracle guidance. The challenge, Child of Air. This card represents our inner child, but from an airy perspective, which has to do with our intellectual spheres, the practicality of our minds, our rationality. But at the same time, since it is child, it is a very juvenile energy, so it represents that energy of ours, which is ruled by Gemini. So it is very much responsible for our playfulness, for our lightheartedness, the airy expression basically of the inner child. But in the present moment, since it is in challenge position, it represents the shadow expression of this card, which means that our minds, our intellectual sphere is filled with very many contradictory, chaotic, and even childish, immature thoughts, which can be very stressful, which can be very, challenging to a lot of people because it can send them into anxiety, a constant state of overthinking, trying to analyze everything, splitting the hair in four. But we have to ask the question, why is this taking place in our lives? Because as we know from astrology, the North Node is in the sign of Gemini, exactly in this part of the sky, and the North Node represents what we have to do and accomplish karmically, our progress, our evolution, and it has much to do with our mental sphere. So basically, shouldn't our mental spheres be advantaging us right now rather than hindering us? Well, the answer to this is very funny, because before we can actually do something, before we can take an action, we have to do a major cleanup. We have to have our plans clear, logical, applicable, and in tune with wherever we're heading towards in the future. So for this we need a lot of information, we need a lot of clarity, we need a lot of, realistic ideas and plans and, concrete designs for our futures, not just something very uncertain. And most importantly, this is where a hope based on just an intuition, a hope based on something deeply emotional, is not that much relevant for the future, because the world is that much unstable right now. So basically, the shadow expression of the Child of Air is somewhat attacking us, playing tricks on us, confusing us, filling our heads with thoughts and random, chaotic mental impulses which don't belong in our minds, not specifically to hurt us, but rather to return us into innocence. Our knowledge, our practical know-how, all the information that we have accumulated and integrated within ourselves over the course of our lifetime, it is perfectly valid for our primary education, our higher education, all the courses, self-study, everything that we have accomplished and accumulated informationally in our lives. Now that is stored within our brains, that is stored within the mind, but all of that information is basically crystal solid because we have double checked it, because we have taken it as truth. When you study something, when you learn something, you can't really question the authenticity of that information. You have to take it as it is and integrate it within yourself. And over the time, that builds up your self-confidence. That makes your mind powerful, stable, reliable, because it has a system it can work with. And that system can make calculations, predictions, it can solve problems, it can help us navigate our realities just like a GPS. But when something really shocking happens, especially in collective reality, well, then our minds are triggered in a way like when a computer gets blocked, it has to reset itself. So this is like a mental reset where it's not exactly targeting our knowledge, our know-how, our inner mental structures, but it's rather targeting our attitudes towards it. This is where our minds are basically inviting us to take off the robes of the master, to take off the robes of the teacher, and just return to innocence, just acknowledge the fact that we don't know anything really. We are just lost as innocent children. We have to relearn everything, restructure everything that we know until this present moment, because when reality is changing, when the external configurations of physical reality are shifting, are becoming something totally different than we were used to, then the very first course of action is to readapt our intellectual spheres, our brains, our internal GPS, because the rules which are at the base of the well functioning of that inner GPS have changed. So the whole GPS basically has to be upgraded, patched, so to speak, symbolically. And that is exactly what is happening to us in the present moment. So if many of us are feeling that we are no longer that stable professionally, if we cannot rely on our old knowledge, our old methodology, if we can't even rely on how we used to solve certain problems and go about things intellectually just in the past, well, that's absolutely fine, because this energy is returning us, resetting our mental spheres so that we can heal it, we can reconfigure it, and the only way we can do that is if we change our attitudes, if we, abandon our self-importance, if we just accept the fact that yes, maybe 2 or 3 months ago we were like highly skilled professionals in a certain domain and we were the best of the best, we were basically the embodiment of knowledge, but right now all of that has instantly changed and all of us are just students, are just explorers, are just apprentices in the present moment, because this change that has taken place and is also a big work in progress requires us not to take our old roles, our old structures that much seriously and rigidly, but rather just change our attitudes and wanna learn, wanna explore, wanna give up on our powers in order to embrace the curiosity and the learning capacity of an innocent child, because that is the key to our future. So where is all of this leading us? Especially that the shadow expression of the child of air seem pretty straightforward and easy to understand, but it is not an easy energy. It is full of fear, it is full of doubts, full of insecurities, just like when a scared and lonely child tries to understand something which from a mental perspective is way above its capacities. So this is what all of us are going through in the present moment. So this energy can be very uncomfortable and very frightening for some people, because their minds are no longer under their control. Their minds just fill them with doubts, with insecurities, and the more we try to fight against it, the more we try to ground in ourselves in what we know, what is very crystal clear in our minds, the more fight this child of air, our inner child, puts on, because it wants us to abandon that rigid stability. It wants us to abandon our attitudes. It just wants us to acknowledge that right now we're not masters, we're not guides, we're not teachers. We are, all of us equally, are basically students, are just at the very beginning of our journeys, and we have to take on the attitude of a curious child who wants to explore its environment, who wants to understand how the world basically functions in order to, get life skills, in order to know how to navigate in the future. and a rigid attitude and just grounding ourselves in our own mastery, in our own genius intellectual capacities is not enough in the present moment, because that is not going to help us. A book, a course, a treaty, a grimoire, or whatever is definitely not going to help us in the present moment, because all of us right now are basically just scientists, symbolically having to explore something absolutely new, absolutely mysterious, which is just seems as superstition to all of us. And we're trying to understand this, we're trying to analyze it, we're trying to get a grip on it, and that is exactly why we have to stop relating to the old way of thinking, old way of doing things, the old way we used to solve problems. So the opportunity where all of this is leading us is the Ace of Air, which is the most elevated expression of the air element, which is the freedom of mind, the freedom of thought. But this doesn't have just a legal element where we have it is guaranteed by, for example, constitution, the freedom of speech and to think what we wish to think. This is also very metaphysical, because the essence of all of this actually is the power of our minds, the power of our intellectual spheres. This is where all of us have to embody mind over matter. And the only way we can accomplish this, if we have total mental self-discipline, no longer defeat ourselves and our goals, our wishes and desires by our negative thinking, by our, self-defeating thoughts, by our doubts, by the chitter chatter of our minds which doesn't allow us to focus. This is where all of us are invited to embody the healthiest mental sphere that we can possibly accomplish through inner work, because if our futures depend on the quantic power of our minds, which can create anything, which can basically determine what reality is to us, well, that will require us to be as flexible, as open-minded, as, scientific in a very healthy way as we can possibly can. This is a moment where just believing rigidly in something is no longer enough, because the belief has to match the know-how, it has to match the scientific methodology of everything. It has to match the physics, it has to match the chemistry, the science, the quantum physics. And that is the key to the future, that is the key to freedom, that is the key to creating whatever we desire, just by the power of our minds and the infinite potential that lies in our mental capacity, because that is basically the gift of the divine, the gift of Mother Nature, the gift of the Creator to humankind, because without our minds, we would be absolutely nowhere. We'd be still in the caves. That is our biggest weapon, that is our biggest defense, that is basically everything. Like morality, philosophies, the highest octaves of our thinking are very beautiful additions that make us human and make us beautiful, but still the power, the true power, lies in the practicality of all that. How our minds can find a means to manifest those philosophies, those highest octaves of our thinking. So basically, mind over matter has been the big theme of humanity ever since its existence. It was always been like this, just that in the very distant past we had to manifest our thoughts in a very different way, using, for example, even the practicality of our body, our dexterity, the synchronicity between mind and body, because it required like effort, physical effort. Just knowing how to shape a sword out of hot iron was not enough. You had to actually go and do it. You couldn't just manifest it with your thoughts. But this is where things are so very different from every single angle and perspective in the present moment, because maybe right now, due to our technologies and our experience as a species, maybe we can actually manifest stuff much more directly than we could have ever done. And one way or another, the future, our well-beings, our happiness, that ace of air, the true expression of the freedom of our beings depends on the healthy functioning of our mental spheres. And if the year 2019 was a massive emotional purge, a psychological purge, well, this year, at least the first half of this year, is a very profound mental purge where our thought patterns and the functioning of our mind is reconfiguring itself to very healthy levels and very healthy ways of expressing it. And finally, we get to the resolution, our more distant past, and this is return to innocence, the child of water. When our minds are healed, when our minds function in our highest good and the highest good of every sentient being, well, that makes the emotional world, the power of our emotions, that much more pure, that much more innocent, where naivety and a certain kind of idealism is no longer anything negative, it is no longer self-defeating, but it's rather a virtue, it is an asset, it just makes us that much more true, spiritual, compassionate, unconditional, and most importantly, the thing is, most of us actually are ready for that even now. Most of us already have that child of water living prosperously inside of us, just that it cannot express itself. You know, if we're that much idealistic, if we are that much naive, if we don't fear anything, if we express our thoughts and our unconditional love without any filters, without holding back basically, well then all the other people are going to think that we are so naive, that we're just serving ourselves up to be victims to a toxic narcissist or someone who is embodying rigid survival mentality. So the world we live in the present moment cannot allow us to be as innocent and pure as we are at the very core of our beings. But when the world changes just a little bit, this can be so very different, and that emotional purity and innocence of ours is what actually changes the world, because what we hold as morality and how pure our morality is, how free from fear it is, determines our legal systems, determines the unwritten rules which govern society, and if all of us embody innocence just a little bit more, passionately, just a little bit more freely, well then already the world is going to be that much more of a beautiful, kinder and more loving place for everyone equally. Well, thank you so much for listening. Wish everyone a blessed and safe day. Until next time, bye for now.